Hello everyone, welcome to StraightA. Dawson here, back with another video, and today we'll be ranking all the free agencies of NFL teams this offseason. As you see on board, I got the tier maker 1 through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 12, 13 through 16, 17 through 20, 21 through 24, 25 through 28, and then 29 through 32. And I'll be ranking all these teams based on how well I think they did in their free agency. Gonna be completely, consistent with my grades and just kind of ranking them within their own grade tier too. So I'm excited for that. So before we get started, please leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and comment any suggestions for the videos going forward below. Without further ado, let's get right into the video. All right, we're gonna get right into the video here today, and I'm looking at these teams, and of course I got some of them kind of initially, laid out for me, so I can kind of get my thought process rolling a little bit. But first, and the only F I gave in all of the free agency videos are the Dallas Cowboys, and this is just one of those unfortunate things. They just did nothing in free agency. They just did nothing. They lost nobody. They gained nobody. So they just kind of honestly should be like a more middle of the road. They should probably have gotten a C, but they just didn't do anything. I mean, when you don't sign new people, when you don't re-sign your players, and when you don't lose anybody, you just kind of stay the same, and you just don't do anything to actually add productivity to your team. You did nothing to progress from the F, but you also didn't do anything to make it worse, I guess. So like, this is just one of those unfortunate Fs where like, I don't hate what they're doing because they didn't really need to do any of it. This free agency was kind of just a freebie for a lot of contracts, but they kind of need to prep for other seasons. But again, free agency is all about getting better and replacing what you're missing. So while you didn't lose anything, you didn't have to gain anything to replace any things. So like, it's just weird where you didn't lose anything, so you didn't have to replace anything, but you also didn't re-sign anything. So by default, I feel like you just have to be the worst, right? I mean, I guess you could use logic where that's more of a middle of the road type thing, where some teams you feel like got worse, but because I think my justification for a lot of these other teams was C was like they didn't really change, while D means like they got worse. So I'm just putting Cowboys here purely because they're the only team in free agency that didn't do anything or didn't lose anybody really. So I think it's fair to put them at 32, but if you want to use logic that they are more middle of the road because of that, sure, go ahead. But I'm going to be pretty safe saying they had the worst free agency. Moving forward, also, and I guess like my justification for putting them at 32 is that at least other players replaced their players that they lost with other players, so they changed up their team to maybe try out something different. Because obviously, if you didn't go to the playoffs, or if you aren't the Chiefs, obviously something didn't work, so you need to change up something, whether it's for future reference or not. So take that as you will. Cowboys, you get 32. Then you got the next four teams. Seahawks, Chargers, Vikings, and Bills all got a D- grade for me for various different reasons. A lot of them just got, this whole thing was just they got worse, basically. A lot of the players they replaced didn't feel like good improvements. So who really was the worst here? I'm going to put 31 Chargers. I think Chargers had, this is not talking about the draft. This is purely talking about their free agency signings and their losses. They just got worse in almost every conceivable fashion. They got rid of older players and added younger players that aren't proven at all. So take that as you will. The receiving core just turned into crap, while they didn't really improve in any other aspects really. So I'm going to give the Chargers the 31 spot, but that's beside the point there. I'm going to give the Vikings number 30. And I debated between this team and another team, but the Vikings just, again, also like Chargers. I think they got slightly, or very, very slightly above the Chargers, but again, they didn't really do anything to really boost up their credibility here. They lost Kirk Cousins, one of the worst losses in free agency for a team that's set up to be a pretty decent team. I just think the Vikings deserve 31, or 30, sorry. And sure, they did pretty all right in their free agency, or not free agency, draft, in terms of maybe they got something they can utilize there, I guess. But for now, put the Vikings at 30, and I'm going to put the Seahawks at 29. This purely just because I just think there's a lot of things that went wrong, went right for the Seahawks. So I think they just didn't do much. They lost a lot of veteran pieces there, and they're gambling a lot of other pieces. While I think the Bills, who are going to be 28 here, are a team that kind of feels like they're building up something here to really, really make a big run here. Even though they feel like they downgraded, it feels like there's a lot of upside for the Bills there, and they're kind of more of a fringe D+ team to me now, more than the Seahawks. Feel like a very solid D-. Maybe you can stretch to a D+, but that's kind of how I'm vibing with this team so far. We got another 5 teams in the D+ here. You got the Panthers, the 49ers, the Dolphins, the Broncos, and the Giants. So now it's like, who is that next spot up? Who do I feel like is the lower end of D+? And I'm going to give it to the edge to the Giants. Again, it feels like with so many different contracts, they didn't feel like they progressed any. it feels like their cap issues are taking them to hell, and that they just didn't get any better at all. Like, so I don't know. They're a fringe D- team for me. I think I'd still put them slightly above the Bills, but their signings, of course, are just not very consistent. Of course, losing Saquon Barkley, which is a very big focus point of your offense, does hurt a lot, but I just don't feel like they got better. I feel like they got slightly worse, but they're still a fringe D+ team for me. Well, next up, I'm debating between two teams here. That's going to be the 49ers and the Broncos, because on two ends here, and these are going to be next two teams, 49ers and Broncos have two very different approaches. Broncos are in a rebuilding stage where they have lost a lot of pieces, but they're putting things together to possibly do something for the future, but still not great for the short term, so take that as you will. Well, the 49ers didn't change up anything, but do you need to change up anything? And that's kind of the vibe I'm going in my head here, is who deserves 25 and who deserves 26. And I'm going to lean Broncos go 26 and 49ers go 25. Purely because I don't think the 49ers have any need to do so, to do as much as the Broncos did, but the Broncos did more that probably hurts them a lot in the short term. So this is kind of where my logic is ending up. The Broncos are just prepping for the future, which you shouldn't reward in free agency now, while the 49ers at least are prepping something now, which they really don't need to, I guess. Or yeah, because like they didn't do anything in free agency, so it doesn't really hurt them any, but because they already had a superstar winning team. So, and as far as I know, Brandon Ayuk's still on the team, so they're still good for now in that aspect. But do they really need to put things together? That's kind of why I'm going to give them the edge over the Broncos there. And then Dolphins and Panthers. I'm gonna put Dolphins at 24 and then Panthers at 23. Dolphins, I feel like they added some very key defensive movements, and I feel like that's what puts them over, kind of close to the C range. While I think the Panthers have made some very smart building block pieces here and are prepping for the future, getting rid of some older players, getting some contracts re-signed that they need to kind of prep that team just to kind of bear the winter. Again, I'm going to give the Panthers a slight edge just because I feel like they're making some necessary moves and necessary shifts, while the Dolphins, I feel like, are also making very good defensive moves, but they didn't do that mainly in free agency. I feel like they kind of conquered that in the draft. So I'm going to give the Panthers a slight edge. My phone went off. A slight edge, but not by much. I think Dolphins and Panthers are very similar teams in terms of their free agency ranking. Next up are the C tiers, and this is going to be very middle of the road type teams. It's going to be the Bucks, the Steelers, the Bengals, the Lions, the Cardinals, and the Patriots. All six of these teams receive the C tier for me. And I still think it's just because none of these teams move me, so I really have nothing mostly to say about any of these teams. First of all, kind of in between a couple of these teams here for 2022, but I'm going to put Patriots there. They kind of encompass for what I think is that team is just purely just shifting around pieces to prepare their new coaching staff with a new dynamic and going forward. I don't think they're going to do anything spectacular this year. They didn't add anything that made me really say, oh my gosh, that's the thing that's going to change up the team. It's just going to purely be putting building blocks in place for that team to succeed in the future, which is what they need. Nothing too good, nothing too bad. Cardinals, I think that losing Marquise Brown is a pretty tough one, which is kind of why I'm putting them at the lower end of this C tier. But I still think they made some necessary shifts to the team to help Kyler succeed, and hopefully this next year they can see some sparks of what they can do, but it's still going to be a very long rebuilding process, so they can't do anything too drastic just to change up their whole team overnight. Next up, I'm gonna put over the Lions. I think Lions at 20, I think feels very good. I think they didn't make any really big shifts, but they didn't lose anybody. They improved their secondary slightly, which is why they're in the C tier in the first place instead of D+. So I think they made enough shifts there. Didn't lose anybody big. Got some key re-signings. And I think 20 just feels very appropriate for them. Meanwhile, I'm going to go Bengals at 19. Again, not too many shifts to the team. Lost Joe Mixon, but they kind of replaced him. Everything they lost felt like they were replaced in some good aspects. So they're just a very solid C. Not really too discouraged by that. I'm going to put the Steelers up next at 18 here. If I can ever put the Bengals above them. Boom, bam, boom. Again, getting Russell Wilson, getting Justin Fields, I think puts them a lot up in the C tier, because I think Russell Wilson basically being free and Justin Fields basically being a really good behind Russell Wilson quarterback is going to help them tremendously. Of course, boosting up that defense still, I think is going to be very key for them. They had a very key what's called off-season loss. So I mean, it's just it's kind of one of those things where I feel like they up their offense a little bit, but their defense kind of decreased a little bit, but they still put the band-aids over it enough to resemble a Steelers team. Then finally, I'm going to put the Bucks at 16. This is the perfect C tier for me because you re-signed everybody you need to. You really didn't lose anybody, and now you're kind of in position again to do something good. And you had a couple pieces that kind of changed up the offense, and lost a couple pieces on defense, but otherwise, I think that you're feeling pretty good as the Bucks at number 17. So I feel good about putting you there. The next 8 teams are all in that B- tier, which actually ended up being our biggest tier just purely because of, circumstance of, I think a lot of people slightly improved on the offseason, but you could still put them in fringe C, fringe B+, and all that good stuff. But I think the important one here is that I'm going to start off with the Rams. I think the Rams are the most fringe C tier, or sorry, B- tier team. I think they could put them in C tier pretty comfortably, and I'd be okay with it, because they feel like, almost in a way, they feel like they could still got a little bit worse on the defensive line, but they made necessary improvements in the secondary and the offensive line that I feel like it's all right enough to put them in that B-, where I feel like they've improved on the offseason decently well. Moving on, we got the Browns. Who, again, they didn't make many moves, but again, the moves they did make improved their team. So they added depth. They didn't really lose anybody. They did what they needed to do on the offseason. So I think putting the Browns at B-, slightly above, I think perfectly fine. Kind of adding that to that is the Chiefs. I think with all their re-signings, again, I think you can only say they improved. Adding Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown to the team, I think only improves your team. Your offensive line, your defensive line, all feel like they at least stayed the same, if not got slightly better. So slightly, I think they got better. But, we'll see. The Colts, I think, made even bigger signings than the Chiefs, and then added good pieces. Of course, adding Joe Flacco to the team. That's just a nice little cover-up in case, Anthony Richardson goes down again. I think this team has a very, very bright future with a very solid baseline for what they're doing. The Colts are easily number 13 for me. I think they go slightly above the Chiefs, but they can kind of compete. But, again, the Colts made some really key re-signings on both defense, offensive line, and on their offense just in general. So the Colts, I think, slightly get above them just because I think they got slightly better, and they had just as key of re-signings. Jets, they added some much-needed protection to Aaron Rodgers, not only in the draft, but in the offseason free agency, and their defense at least stayed the same, if not got better. The receivers didn't change, but I feel like the key, depth pieces they added to the Jets are enough to put them at number 12. Then you got these last 3 teams, the Commanders, the Titans, and the Saints. And I'm big fans of actually all 3 of these. The Titans are the most, the team that I warmed up the most on their free agency, which is why they're not next. I think it's going to be the Saints going next. The Saints at number 11 for me is purely based on I like every move they made. I feel like in every way they got slightly better. They feel like it did something, or adding a bunch of these key pieces, or these things that can actually help enhance this team. Chase Young is a great signing for great value. Re-signing Matthew here is great. Just little bits and pieces, I think that's going to enhance their team so much, and they didn't lose anything, which is great. For a team that's in cap hell, they did a whole lot with nothing. So putting them at 11 feels very, very fair with me, and honestly, their free agency grade, or their offseason grade in general, might be even higher because their draft was damn good. So we'll see how it goes. But number 10, I'm giving my Titans fans a little bit of a blessing here. You deserve number 10. I think I'm really warming up to the Calvin Ridley deal, really warming up to your offensive line signings. I'm really warming up to your defensive line signings. I'm really warming up to all these things that are kind of piecing together a really damn good team, possibly. So, Titans, I think your free agency moves are really, really good. It's just, can they actually execute? That's what I get worried about with this team, because losing Derrick Henry did hurt a little bit, but also it's kind of necessary to move on from him. Maybe they should have got a trade for him or something along those lines, but we'll never really know how that would turn out. But I think one of the most fringe B+ team on this list here are the Commanders. The Commanders felt like they did a whole lot with a whole lot of nothing and gained a whole lot of nothing. That's actually really a lot of something. Don't know if that makes sense, but the Commanders signed so many veteran players that could very much enhance their team for a year that I got to give them credit. Most of them are 1-year deals or 2-year deals, so it's not going to hurt them in the long run. So it's just something they can put a Band-Aid over, hopefully enhance their team around a possible, at that time, possible draft quarterback, which you get Drake May or Jaden Daniels, which of course we know is Jaden Daniels. So this is just going to help them even more. I think number 9 is an easy spot for me to put the Commanders. So I almost forgot to put the Packers in. Packers really didn't do a whole lot. They're kind of just slightly above C just because they technically improved. I'll put them right above the Rams and shift everybody up 1. So basically, boom, bada, bing. That's kind of how the actual layouts would be. So actually, Titans would be number 9. Commanders would be number 8. So that's kind of how it changed up. So then we got the B+ and then the A tier teams. I only think there's 3 A's, and that's going to be the Jaguars, Texans, and Eagles here. I think they all 3 did amazing, and we'll get talked about him here in a second. But I think the B+ teams here have very good cases to be made for a lot of their different moves here. First of all, I'm going to put the Raiders at number 7. I think they are the most fringe B+ team to me, but they made a lot of just small improvements going to help build their team for the future, as well as some big moves nowadays that are going to actually help enhance their team for one season, especially competing that really extremely competitive AFC West top-heavy team. It's just some very key things like Michael Gallup getting signed there, really good. Their defensive line with Christian Wilkins and re-signing John Jenkins and Adam Butler, adding offensive line help with Cody Whitehair. I think it's just a low-key good B+ move for the Raiders. But again, I think they're a fringe B-, so that's why they kind of get the lower end of it all. Then I'm going to put the Ravens. I really thought I'd put the Ravens a little bit higher, but outside of Derrick Henry, did they really do much? Not really. But Derrick Henry is such a key piece to that team. I think it's really key for them to do so. Their defense only got better. The losses they sustained weren't that bad. So the Ravens really just ended up really coming out really far ahead here. But really, I mean, I can't put too much weight over Derrick Henry, especially when I see the Falcons. When you add a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, it's going to be great for you. And now, granted, we can talk about their draft grades in the future, but the Falcons, I think, only enhanced the team around them. Didn't lose pretty much anything. Their secondary still greatly intact, if not, replaced and made a little bit better. I think their defensive line could use a little bit more help. It didn't get worse, and they added Kirk Cousins, which I think is a big thing for them that they needed to do, especially with their draft position in the draft. Of course, we know what ended up happening with that, but still, beside the point, I think Falcons are number 5. Number 4, though, last B+ team, I think, is the Bears easily. Bears are easily B+, and I almost would still give them an A today because I think they added so many key pieces. They had number 1 pick. They knew that. They got rid of Justin Fields, so they got rid of him and made that decision. They grabbed some awesome pieces for the defense, awesome pieces for the offense, and are just ready to win. And are the closest. I'm this close to doing it. The only reason I didn't is just because I feel like a lot of the pieces they added are very going to be band-aid type, band-aid over a bullet hole type deal for the short term. Plus, I think that a lot of the players they added will not add as much value as we hope, but it'll help enhance the team at least a little bit. So we'll put them at 4. Hesitate for it all. But going to the A tier teams, I think the Jags had an A tier offseason. I do think they had the lowest of the A tiers just because I think they added a lot of pieces that feel like a whole lot of nothing. But I also think the moves they made, having Ridley not be re-signed, I think is just a very good, cool move. Getting Josh Allen to re-sign, amazing. I think the Jags just made some very smart, very key decisions that helped enhance the depth of their team, the players on their team, and just overall feel like they got better and are prepping for a push, especially against a Texans team and a Titans team who are improving, and not to mention the Colts. Colts did damn well too in this offseason. AFC South is going to get very competitive real quick. And this is the hardest decision I made this whole time. Texans and Eagles. Texans had amazing. I got so many players in the offseason. Stephon Diggs added so much value for them. Eagles added Saquon Barkley, added some very key defensive pieces that I'm kind of blanking on right now. I just had it in my head before we got started here. But they just add, like I'm looking at, like they re-signed A.J. Brown. Devontae Parker signed a one-year deal. Devonta Smith re-signed. Well, they exercised his 5th-year option and, gave him an extension. Beside the point, added so many key pieces like Devin White, Julian Okwara, Bryce Huff. I just think this is such an amazing offseason. That's why I'm going to give the Texans number 2 and Eagles number 1. I think it's easy for me. I think Eagles are number 1 here. Just with the talent they have and the quality of it all, Eagles get a slight bump over the Texans. Well, I think the Texans had a lot of pieces added too, but most of them are kind of more in that core B+ signing category. And so I think it's kind of fair to say they got better, but also it's fair to say that there could be some improvements still made compared to the Eagles, who I think had the most amazing offseason you could possibly do. So without further ado, guys, that's my ranking from 1 through 32 of all the free agency signings. Please let me know your opinions down below and how you like my rankings, and we'll talk about drafts here in the next week or so, and we'll get started with it all. Without further ado, guys, StraightA Dawson is out of here.